Hello, everyone. Welcome, 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 welcome. My name's Shakil. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm co-founder of Anima Leadership, and I will be facilitating today. All right. Let's begin. The current political and economic context is just, as it says here, is creating an onslaught of constant, unpredictable change that is just resulting in skyrocketing anxiety, confusion, and fear across workplaces. This erodes both capacity and trust on teams. So, anxiety, confusion, and fear are the words that are highlighted because this is what we have to address on work teams right now because it's just it's just so challenging. We were working with I was talking to an organization recently. I said, "Well, can you give me examples of what's actually happening on the ground?" And they couldn't come up with concrete examples because it was just like people in a state of fear. Now, unless you're an organization in the US that's already been torn down, most people are like at the precipice. They're at the start. They're like, we don't know what's going to happen. We think we might be affected, or we're uncertain if we're going to be affected. And there's just so much anxiety. And people are carrying this, bringing this into their teams, just because, well, we're human and that's how life works. So, so this is a big part is just dealing with our emotions. And this is a time of crisis leadership. We thought crisis leadership ended during the pandemic. No, we are in an ongoing state of crisis leadership. So if these are skills that we just need to develop. And you know, today I'm also going to invite you to also help us understand, like, and share what's happening on your teams. What's happening for you? What's coming up? What's the struggle? Why are you here? So if there's any, ideas you've got, drop something into chat. Even right now, what are the kind of things that's happening for you? What are the things that you are seeing? What is hard right now in leadership, that is on the ground? Anyone want to share? Put something in the chat. Yeah, yeah. Cancellations of DI training, short staffing, people leaving. Yeah. Burnout, huge. Yeah. Funding issues, fear and burnout, different values. Afraid to advocate. There's big chills everywhere. Staff morale. Yep. Jaded and cynical, moral injury. Staff seeing you as leaders and enemy. Yeah. Pace is crazy. Yep. Immigration, deportation fears, right? Um, Yeah, and then leaders not being that helpful when they say things like try not to be political. Um, yeah, lots of things. So ongoing and ongoing, right? So I'm going to share some ideas with you today to get started. Again, there's nothing that I can say is complete, and there is no such thing as a silver bullet. We are in process. And process and progress are the two things we're going to keep focusing on because there is no silver bullet. There's no single answer to this. So, crisis leader requires lots of things. I'm going to focus on the things that are important from our perspective, in terms of working on equity, diversity, inclusion, and just what it means to create an environment in which everyone feels like they matter and belong. So the foundation of the work is really relational intelligence. This is everything that it's. I've talked about this in my book. Anahit's talked about that in her book. So we're not going to go into this, but just to say that this is a time where human to human interactions, your intelligence related to that is so critical. Self-awareness, self-regulation, especially when things get hard, empathy, your ability to perspective take, your ability to build community and teams, your ability to have and step into brave conversations. All of these and more are part of just a large body of work that I'm calling relational intelligence, sometimes known as emotional intelligence, emotional literacy, whatever you want to call it. This is foundational, and this is so critical if you want to deal with the feelings that people are struggling with. Okay. Now, another part of this is creating environments if we want to be working from a crisis leadership perspective, but also from an inclusion perspective. Psychological safety is critical, and I've done an entire session on this, and psychological safety is not the same thing as safe space. Safe space is therapeutic. That's not what we do in a workplace. However, we can create psychological safety, and this is the ability to raise questions, to raise concerns, to challenge, to bring up unpopular or difficult topics, sensitive topics, and to do that without the fear of repercussion from your supervisors or from your peers. And it's the absence of like negative repercussions that is a big part of this. Psychological safety, as I've talked about a lot, is also the number one factor in high performing teams. So you need psychological safety for high performance and you need it for equity, diversity, inclusion. So I've done a whole section on that. That will not be the focus on today, but I know my team will be able to put in links to our previous library of cafes, and we've done at least one or two that are entirely dedicated to psychological safety. Now, also non-polarized thinking is a big part of this, non-polarized behavior, non-polarized leadership. Again, I've done an entire um, cafe on this, and it's integrated throughout our work. So non-polarized leadership is different than being neutral. And that's really important here because neutrality only feeds and supports oppression, but being non-polarized is a different game. It's your ability to be fluid and step in and out of different people's perspectives, to empathize with them without dropping all of who you are and what your beliefs are. So non-polarized thinking is a big part of the work. It will not be a focus on today. EDI literacy, again, this is also critical for crisis leadership because equity, diversity, inclusion, we just need this in general. Otherwise, there's all kinds of patterns you're going to miss. And for example, right now, there's organizations that are cutting back. Well, what's interesting is that if you often look at numbers for organizations that are downsizing, if you don't know the patterns, then you won't be aware of the fact that so often the first people to go or the biggest chunks of people to go tend to be racialized. That's a pattern. Racial minorities tend to be women. That ends up being a pattern. And so if you don't have an EDI lens, even during these times of crisis, you're going to miss um, all kinds of information that are relevant. So our belief here is that there's a minimum of 360 hours of learning that's needed. And again, we've done cafes on this too, but I'm just hitting that these are critical pieces for crisis leadership. You want to be inclusive and effective. Now, relevant to your organizational and sector, during these kinds of crises, you need to have strategies that are nimble, that are emergent, and that's going to be organizational sector specific. So I got nothing to say on that for your specific organization, except to say that you've got to have strategies where you are able to be fluid and move with what's changing and your ability to hold on to what's important and let go of what's not, because that's what the moment needs. Now, the last thing, which is going to be the focus of today, is what's known as ambiguity tolerance. Okay, now this is so important, not just for crisis leadership, but just effectiveness inside organizations as a whole. So, what is ambiguity tolerance? Ambiguity tolerance is the ability to manage uncertainty skillfully, to hold in mind complex information about what's happening in the world around you without rushing or defaulting to binary thinking. Something is good or something's evil. Something's a disaster or something's just an opportunity. Like the idea that we fall into one or the other, forgetting that there's incredible continuums of realities in this. So what we know from the research is that people that are high in ambiguity tolerance, this is positively correlated with many outcomes, including higher self-esteem, higher self-efficacy, meaning the ability to do things even when things are challenging, resilience. It's tied to creativity, problem solving, the get up and go, the entrepreneurial and leadership traits. And so it's one of these things that's really important. So we're going to talk about how do we develop the ability to work with uncertainty on our teams, and how do we build that capacity on our teams because it is nothing but uncertain right now. Okay. So what's important to recognize is this amount of uncertainty frequently puts people on the edge of fight, flight, or freeze. People are either collapsing and not doing anything because they're frozen, or they're in a state of fight. And so in either state, it's an element of reactivity. And so uncertainty and large amounts of uncertainty does that because humans, we need more stability. Okay? And so we can be in a state where people are very close to being triggered or are triggered, and that's just an awareness for you to have inside yourself because it might be happening to you without your awareness, but also what may be happening inside your team. If you're noticing you yourself are more curt or have less capacity or are more irritable, or you're noticing that on your teams, know that's not about the individual. It's not just about you, it's about the system we are in right now. And your ability to differentiate and go, right, it might not just be me, right? It might not just be that individual on my team. That sense of like people being crabby and stressed, that's the time period we are in. So your ability to notice that and do something about it, your ability to self-regulate is so important. Now, this is again self-regulation, self-awareness, empathy for others. These are all part of what I've already talked about regarding relational intelligence. Okay. So, being aware of that, the question becomes what are strategies that we can use to improve our ability to deal with uncertainty on our teams, to do that within ourselves. Okay. So I'm going to talk about four of them today. I'm going to talk about understanding context. I'm going to talk about the sense making, which is very important. I'm going to talk about emphasizing things that are within our locus of control, things we can actually influence. And the fourth area is building team culture that supports our ability to work with uncertainty. Okay. Now, um, first of all, the idea of understanding context. So to put to put things into perspective, the particular moment that we are in politically, where Trump is on his second term, where the U.S. government agencies are being hacked apart by using a chainsaw, where Canadian sovereignty is under threat from our closest neighbor, the United States, where the world is just literally falling apart in a way that we've not seen. We gotta have to understand the context, because if you think that's about one person, then that's part of the problem. That's a very myopic perspective. This is much bigger than one individual or a group of people. So, what I want to put this into context is that we are at the other end of 40 years of neoliberal economics. And neoliberal economics is fundamentally the idea that started in the 80s. It's the idea that um, the private sector is the way to go. Reduce government, decrease um, any kind of restrictions on capitalism, on corporations, because they create the jobs. And the whole impetus is to grow the GDP. It's like the GDP is the Bible, which is totally not the way to go, but that is what the economic policies have done. Cut back on healthcare, cut back on all public spending, and that's what neoliberalism fundamentally does. Now, what it does is it does grow the economy, because the economy is 4 to 6 times what it was in the 1980s when these processes started. However, very few of us feel 4 to 6 times richer. Our societies do not feel 4 to 6 times richer. So those policies have been in play. They have been enacted by conservative governments, by liberal governments, by progressive so-called governments. This has been what we've done. Okay. And so the mess is really the models we've been using. So that's an important part to pay attention to. Now, those policies basically create the rich get richer and literally the poor get poorer and the poor are taught to turn on each other. And so that creates desperation. But on top of that, we had 9/11, the ongoing war on terror that normalized us versus them, living under siege, reduced civil liberties, incredible amounts of surveillance, whether it's at airports or in public. So that helped create the context we're also in. News didn't help. Advertised-driven news media, sensational and entertainment over important and newsworthy. That's been a factor in this. Increased media choice remarkably led to media bubbles, echo chambers, and social fragmentation. Disinformation has amplified all these problems by social media, by bots, by AI, by right-wing media, the rise of dishonest leaders, con artists, conflict entrepreneurs in media and politics. The economic crisis of 2008 didn't help. The election of Barack Obama that enraged the far right, unlimited campaign contributions in US elections, the rise of copycat right-wing movements and strategies in other places like Canada and Europe. So we've seen this. So this is just some of the context that got us here. So for if you want to work on helping reduce uncertainty on your teams in your workplace, you have to understand context, which means you have to pay attention. And that's paying attention without overwhelming yourself. But you've got to know that it's more than one factor and definitely not one person. But this context allows for these type of opportunistic leaders. Fundamentally, we entered an era, certainly in the US, which is known as gangster government. Like this is where we are in. That is not hyperbole, right? This is what's happening. And if you aren't aware of that, then there's more information you need to explore. Okay, and there's lots more we could add to this, but just to say context matters, you have to understand this. And so, as I said, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer in this context, but the poor turn on each other because of how manipulation happens, how disinformation happens. There is manipulation that's at play. Otherwise, like, those of us that are not part of the elite, we make up the vast majority of people, but we're taught to fragment. Okay, sense making. Now, this is really important. This is the second strategy if you want to work on helping your teams and helping your organization, helping yourself. Sense making is so important. So, what is sense making? Well, it's the ability to make meaning from negative situations. And what the research shows is that those who are able to do that, make meaning, whether it's been research that's done with prisoners of war to victims of sexual assault, that people who've been able to make meaning have been better able to bounce back from stress, from tragedy, from trauma. Okay. Now, this is a big part of what we have to do both personally and organizationally. Now, I want to share a story because this is really important because I had what I'm calling my crisis of faith. And this was this moment where I wasn't able to find meaning and I went into fight, flight, or freeze. It was 2019. It was right over New Year as 2018 was shifting over to 2019. And I was at a silent meditation retreat. And it was a 3, 4 day retreat happening over New Year's. And on my first night there, I had the most awful dream. And the dream was one in which there was war. I saw my children just being hurt, um, there was torture, it was just so terrifying. And it had everything to do with the current moment we were in. I had been tracking authoritarianism. I had been watching the rise of Trump and what was happening. And in my biology, my family comes from surviving two civil wars, one when my parents were children and one when I was a child. So all this stuff of society breaking is deep in my DNA as someone who comes from the South Asian context. Now, with that information, I'm in a silent meditation retreat and I am completely triggered. And in this triggered state, I am so fearful. What am I thinking about? As soon as I'm making a list, and my list includes, okay, when I get done here, the first thing I'm going to do is learn how to use a gun. The second thing I'm going to do is teach my children survival skills, and then probably they'll need to use weapons. And I just was going completely, I was just out of it, and I was terrified. And I'm in a silent meditation retreat, so I can't talk to anybody on top of it, right? So, and you know, sometimes weird things happen in silent meditation retreats because you get really inside your own head. Now, I was probably in this state of fight, flight, or freeze and planning and strategizing about how to survive this horrific future that I saw coming, which is more and more real today than it was, 5, 6 years ago, but it was part of the arc of where we are. Now, as I was doing this, um, I found a way to shift. And I found a way to shift because, again, in the silent meditation retreat, I had lots of time to think. And then I started thinking about situations because my fear was authoritarianism. Then I started becoming more cognitive, like, well, where do I know authoritarianism from? And I was like, well, wait a minute. I was born in Pakistan. My family, I spent my summers in Pakistan. And then I was like, wow, when I was there, actually so much of the time, there was a military regime actually every time I was there. And I was like, well, wait a minute, my people know how to survive that. In fact, my family. And I started drawing on the experience of my people and realizing at that moment that I actually could develop skills that help me survive authoritarianism because it's within my family. It's within my people. And as I started thinking about that, I started relaxing. And the fear started becoming more proportional. And my ability to make meaning in that moment helped me also reconnect to who I was. Because then I was like, well, wait a minute. I've I've been in the work of justice and building bridges for most of my adult life. That's like 25 years at that time. So am I going to abandon that for reactivity and guns and survival training? I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense for me. That's not who I am. And allowed me to reconnect with who I was. So through that process of a silent meditation retreat, I went from complete crisis, lost, panicked, survivalist training in my head, to then remembering because of my family, because of my ancestors, that it is possible to not just survive, but also thrive under very difficult circumstances. So I put this out there because I want you to think about as a leader, how do you make meaning of this historical and critical and terrifying um, political moment that we are in? So these are questions that I want you to think about. Okay. These are questions. Um, why did this happen? How did it happen? How am I feeling about it? Get your feelings in there is a big part of it. What can I learn? What good may come out of it? I know that's really hard to say, but what good may come out of this is also you not just going fully into disaster thinking, but also thinking about what are other opportunities that might be here. Now, what stories, what mythology, what inspiration can I draw upon from my family, my people, my ancestors on how to overcome adversity? I want you to think a moment about that. And you're going to hopefully spend some time doing this afterwards. But if there's something that pops to mind that helps you think about or make meaning of this moment in a way that can help you survive, thrive, feel inspired, as opposed to just feel triggered and overwhelmed and reactive. Something can help stabilize you. What is that? And again, take a moment. Maybe something pops to mind, maybe something that's surprising that pops to mind for you. But if there is something, just write something in the chat. If there's not, it's okay. But if there's something in your lineage, something in your loved ones, something in your history, or just in general, when you reflect on it, it's like, okay, or connected to adversity you've faced before that you found your way through. If there's something there, write something in the chat, just for a moment. Mhm. This is the moment that Appalachian Voices has been training for. My son grounds me. We take care of each other. Yeah. So while this session isn't going to be about how do you make meaning overall, I want to just let you sit with that because that's important. Now, but you can also go another direction because this is the personal part, but you're in an organization. This is what you're going to do for yourself, I hope, is find some way to make meaning. But then there's also how do you make meaning as an organization team, right? So again, how are we feeling about this in our organization? What can we learn? What might be good? What might be opportunities that come out of this? But also, what stories or inspiration or purpose can we draw upon from our organization, our stakeholders, our history, our members, the people that we serve? How have they overcome adversity in the past? Maybe there's already stories embedded. Maybe in fact there's stories every day because you serve particular people and you see very inspiring examples. Maybe there's a story in there that becomes a an emblem for your team, that becomes a phrase that your team can go back to. So important. So this meaning making has to happen on a personal level and as an organizational level. And organizations that find pithy stories or phrases that capture the moment for themselves, that keep us going, that can be very, very helpful and inspiring. Okay, item number three. So you've done meaning making, you've context setting. The third area is locus of control. Okay, so what that means is while the world is falling apart and it's overwhelming, sitting in a state of overwhelm and reactivity doesn't help, but focusing people on concrete really does. So, what's within your focus of control? What is concrete that your team can work on, even if things are falling apart? Is it service to your clients or to your members? Is it focusing on the quality of your work? Is it on team performance? Is it on deliverables? What is the concrete thing that you can focus on, that you as a leader can get your team to focus on? Because guess what? Otherwise, we're going to be paralyzed. Otherwise, we're not going to have anything to focus on besides rumination. So, locus of control becomes very important. So, focus on the things that you can change positively, that you can do really well and help your team, help your organization move towards that. So important because they got to feel in control, and they feel in control if you model a certain amount of control. Now, I'm gonna I'm gonna caveat that in a moment because you have to be authentic. We don't want a pretense, but you do want to demonstrate, hey, this is what we are going to focus on. This is where leadership is so needed. Not leadership collapse, crisis leadership. Okay. Now, building team culture. So, if we're going to talk about this idea of ambiguity, tolerance, and building our ability to manage uncertainty, well, your team culture is critical. So, there's lots of things you can do. Gratitude practice is one of them. This means how often do we give praise? How often do we celebrate? How do we celebrate the wins? And really, not just like, yeah, we did great and move on, but like, hey, let's have a lunch and let's just really, we just went through a really big quarter. We just really delivered on that. Let's do something that's celebratory and let's talk about it. Okay. Our negativity bias is very easy to fall into. That is what humans default towards because fight, flight, or freeze is part of negativity bias. So we got to actively work on gratitude, on giving thanks to each other, giving thanks for what is here, giving praise, celebrations. Those are things we don't do enough of. So gratitude practice can help build that culture. Okay. Encouraging self-care is very important. And gratitude practice supports self-care. Okay. Self-care means um, during this time, people are don't realize that your self-care is helping you take in the oxygen so you can get back in there and do some more work. Um, we were talking about a really big, difficult context issue. And then I said, and guess what, folks? Tomorrow I'm going skiing for a week. See you later. I hope you have a good week. I'll be back to the crisis after my ski trip. Because guess what? I need oxygen mask to me too. So do you. So encourage self care. All right. Look after yourself as a leader. That means also modeling it too, which means, hey, let's make sure this finishes before 4 o'clock or before the workday because I do not want to stretch into the evening. I have to get back to my kids. I've got to go to my yoga class, whatever it is that you need to do. But boundaries is an important part of this work. Not being boundaryless, that is going to burn us out, but being boundaried and still being in the work. But you can't be in the work for a long period without burning out if you don't set up boundaries. If you don't find joy, okay? So joy is resistance. Self-care is resistance. All right. Now on teams, and this is huge, and this is a big part of what we do in a lot of our trainings around authentic management and brave conversations. But how do you nurture feedback-rich environments? You have to nurture feedback-rich environments because people need to talk. People need to be able to raise issue. Remember the part about psychological safety that I talked about, which is different than safe space. People need to be able to talk about difficult issues, things that are working in the organization, processes that are awesome and processes that are not so awesome. And so creating an environment where feedback goes not just from people in positions of power to people with less positions of power, but in multi directions, that's a big part of this work. If you want to deal with uncertainty, diversifying decision making and having decision making across, giving more people the ability to input and control the different parts of what they are most connected to. So, um, this is like the opposite of micromanaging. It is really giving people the ability to make decisions that are relevant to them, relevant to their job, um, and making that a bit more democratic so that everyone has a little bit of input in different places. Okay, that doesn't mean everything's a democracy and that everything has to be consensus based at all. But when people feel even a little bit empowered to make decisions, it makes a big deal. So again, the kind of things I think about, which I just think are just so stupid. I'm sorry, I know that's super judgy, but like, but you know, the idea of not having people be adults in their workplace to be able to do things like flex schedules where they can work from home. Like those are just super simple things, but organizations, I'm like, okay, if you're going to treat people like children, they're probably going to live down to your expectations. Okay? Treat people like adults. You want people to work with uncertainty? If you're in a small organization, create rules that make sense for your team. Okay. So that includes diversifying decisions enough that people feel like I'm an adult. I have to look after my kids. Why do I have to get approvals in 17 different ways 2 weeks advance? Like it doesn't make sense. Find ways to get rid of that tape as best you can within your locus of control. If you're in a big organization, it's not with all within your control. Okay, I get it. But things that are, make it easy for people to act like adults. Okay. Don't treat them like kids. And those are just one way that you can diversify and give people more autonomy over their decisions. Generally, I find that people live up and exceed our expectations when we give them more capacity. Okay, regular discussions regarding strategy and context. This is important. Regular, authentic, and precise communications. This is, again, a big deal. Okay, so when things are uncertain, um, because we're in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, if we as leaders don't give people precise information, then you know what they're going to do? They're going to make up the information, and it's going to be the least flattering and probably the most negative, right? So, with that in mind, even when you don't know the answer, we can say that. We can say, hey, you know what? Things are changing so rapidly. I don't know exactly when I'm going to know this information, but I'm going to update you by the end of this week and let you know what I know. We're going to get back to you with some information, and if I get it sooner, I will tell you. Expect a note from me by Friday. Like just precise things that we do know, that we even if it's uncertain. But even that's better than I don't know. I'll tell you when I know is actually a lack of precision. If you don't know, give an update on Friday. Say, hey, folks, I'm still waiting. Here's what I did learn during that time. Here's what we're still waiting for. Again, I'll update you at the team meeting on Wednesday so that even little steps, one day at a time, is helpful. It will help settle people, especially those of us that tend to get more anxious. Okay. Again, you're dealing with people's emotions, and emotions are massive and big. So you're working um, also in your context to build this ability to work with ambiguity, but you do it by creating stops that we're going to all be checking in on. All those things help. Okay. All right. There's lots of things we could add to this list. I have a couple more. Um, Listening circles is something we use a lot, and listening circles are things that we're doing as a community practice through Anima, and these are super helpful. These help process rapid change, world events. It helps develop empathy, and listening circles are just where it can be as simple as a go around. How's everybody feeling about this? To it could take 5 minutes. It could be a specific thing that we do once a week because we just know our team needs it. Okay. And it's a little bit built off of restorative practices, but those are really good. So building your team culture is also, and there's many other steps, and I'm sure you've got other ones to put in as well. Now, the last thing I'll say as a leader is you need to be authentic, but there's going to be things that you can't say in front of your team. There are going to be things you can't drop your leadership and totally dissolve in front of your team and have a total freak out in front of your team. You need a separate group of peers to do that. That is not your direct reports. Okay? That gives you the space to be human and totally like unravel and be held by others just as you are holding your team. Okay. It's just a way of being responsible and accountable. Now, as a leader, I can be vulnerable in front of my team and I have to be. I can say, I have to tell you, I do feel nervous about what's happening. I don't know, and that does make me a little fearful. Okay. And um, and here's what we're going to work on, because if I don't have things to work on, it's going to make me dysregulated. So here's what we're going to do. And people will follow, because guess what? We are designed to both lead and we're designed to follow. Just that's in our biology. Okay. So crisis leadership requires that. And ambiguity tolerance is a big part of it. You want to develop those ambiguity tolerance skills. It requires to develop a whole set of skills to manage uncertainty. And some of these should feel very familiar to you because they're from other places. So we're just packaging them in this way to say, look, uncertainty. These are the kind of things. Let's go back to the basics. Let's go back to our relational intelligence. But then there's other things that are more than that, meaning making. We should be doing this on a regular basis. We probably don't, but bring it in because it's needed. Okay. All right. I'm going to pause us there and and just pause for reflections. Okay. So what I'd love to do is just for you to take a moment, take a moment and today in looking at working with your teams and specifically around um, ambiguity, tolerance, and dealing with uncertainty. What was helpful? What was one idea that sort of really resonated for you, really stood out for you? What was helpful from today?
I found it so helpful to, remember to do things for our teams that make it easier for them to live their actual lives and to try to help build capacity through that so we can manage all the emotions and all the polarization and all the fears and anxiety and also like make the workplace a little bit more authentic and organic as opposed to as artificial as it can be in some spaces.
Hmm. Hmm. Thanks, Deb. Appreciate that. What else was helpful for you?
Um,
Think
I uh, I was sort of brought back to thinking about, yeah, our ancestors or grandparents and the list of things that people listed that their families had gone through. And I got to thinking about, my family lived through the Russian Revolution, and Russia's, Ukraine is in a conflict again in the same area my family left 100 years ago. Um, but that's the story we all share. Like there are similar threads from everyone. And so there's some context in that we're kind of in this together, and we also have this, the strength and capacity to draw on what our parents, grandparents, and those that came before us have.
Mm. Thank you, Rod. Appreciate that. Um,
I think your reminder too about thinking about the current context, but not just, this immediate moment of March 25th or the month of March, that we've in a lot of ways been in crisis mode for several months, several years, um, given all of the pieces that have happened, even just using COVID forward. And the impact that that has. And I think for me, it also has brought in the pieces of external to my work world as well, because there's an additional layer of those same historical moments, political, financial crisis moments that are also happening in all of our personal lives and are impacting us personally, not just professionally, and how that compounds it, I think, that much more than um, what we sometimes let ourselves feel, and that it really is a big weaving moment that we're trying to separate both. When we're at work, we need to be our work self, and when we're at home, we need to be our home self, but really they are one and the same, and the positive affects the positive and the negative affects the negative.
Thank you so much, Brady. Appreciate that. That's great. Mimi.
I think for me, the institutional betrayal, the sense of institutional betrayal, especially when we're functioning in such a already colonial structures of thinking and doing things, that the feeling of being complicit doesn't ever escape, regardless of how much locus of control and ambiguity tolerance I build. And sorry, that sounds like a very doomsday situation, but like that is how it feels a lot of the times. It's how do I escape the colonized mindsets, right? How do I explain the colonized philosophies, and how do we disentangle our work selves, and like what I think it was Brady who just talked about that, right? Our work selves and our private selves, and that they're not very different. So to think a certain way in my private life, and then to have to almost be complicit with the institutions that are only perpetuating that violence and harm, can be a tough place to navigate, regardless of how much tolerance we build.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you, Mimi. Um, you know, and what I think about is sometimes the more we know, the more we can tie ourselves up into knots. And so it's one of those things where where the meaning making for me really comes in, because I've also been in those places where I feel like there's no win for me in any context. And then I can get really despairing. And that's where the meaning making stuff comes in, because again, uh, while we can know a lot of stuff, it can also become an emotional quagmire, and it's hard to feel empowered and get out of, because we can just be in these loops and never feel like we get a day off. And so just an important thing you're making me reflect on, but also something for you to think about as well, is just, what else might be needed in that to also interrupt that for you, because we're never going to be perfect. That's for damn sure. That's just the messiness.
Yeah, no, thank you.
So just something to think about, Mimi. Jacqueline, I see your hand, and then we're going to just take any other questions that might also bring in questions. And Rebecca, if there's anything else you see, because I haven't gone through the chat, I'm trying to focus here on the conversation. If there's anything else you see, please bring some highlights up too. Jacqueline.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the first point that you spoke about in terms of context, because I think sometimes the context is missing, and we get into that individual conversation before we really understand this work is actually happening within a container of systems, and
Mhm,
sometimes overlapping systems.
mhm.
And so I would really love for there to be a session at some point looking at systems within systems, or ecosystems, because I think that system to system conversation is so powerful, and much needed right now. So I thought the context ideas that you presented was really the start of a tracking of systems, but it wasn't explicitly stated as systems. So would love to see that moving forward.
I'd love to see you lead that, Jacqueline, because it seems like
I
you
would
got
be happy to work
mine.
with you.
I love it. It's clear you got a vision on that one. That's beautiful. Perfect. Rebecca, is there anything else you want to share that's come up in terms of highlights or questions that we should address in the
Yeah,
last minutes?
there's one here that says so many leaders I work with are terrified of hosting listening circles in case people trigger each other when they share. What are the skills, tools they need to feel comfortable in hosting those spaces? So, um, what skills do you need to build to be able to create a container where you can have an effective and productive listening circle?
Yeah, well, um, we're doing uh, community circle practices right now, because there is a bunch of skills. But the first thing that I would say is um, it's your comfort with your own emotions in the first place. Frequently, people feel overwhelmed by the emotions that might come up in a space, and so they project fears before they even get there. And so for some leaders, it's not the thing to be able to lead because you haven't quite developed it. So you need to go lower. You need to go at a place that, don't call it a listening circle. Just go around once and see what it's like to say, how's everybody doing on a scale of 1 to 10 today? And just start there. It's small steps that build your capacity. And it does require empathy skills. It does require skills around your own self-management. So if someone says something, that you don't get triggered yourself by it. or you know how to manage your trigger if someone says something. And it also requires facilitation skills, right? And process skills. So if you don't have those things, you know, it's just like lead a team meeting and just see how everybody's doing. It doesn't have to be called a listening circle. Go to listening circle when you're ready for it. But again, stay within what you can do and stretch yourself a little bit. And if you want to learn how to do it, then come and join us for the listening circles. Practice and participate in it and build your skills from there. But it's not something that you can get leaders to do unless they themselves are ready. You might need to do stuff just for your team if that's the case. And again, nothing stopping you from organizing things for yourself and for a handful of employees. Even that's useful. And stretch yourself out from there as your skill builds. Okay. Anything else, Rebecca?
I see one more question, but I just wanted to make sure there weren't any folks that wanted to ask a question or share a thought, a last thought into the space. Okay, so
sorry, it's Tash here. I started thinking about it would be interesting for executive leadership to actually work through building, like collectively building their context, the context to be able to then also share it and understand it. Like, and I'm just wondering if that's something that has been done, or like what you would think about a process like that, or anything. Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts about having executive leadership collectively build context to share out to begin those conversations?
I think it's a great idea. I think sometimes that can be very inspiring to have leaders do something they're not used to, because so many leaders are just used to putting out fires, that their ability to take a breath and go, okay, well, hang on, what's the context of the fires that we're in for a few minutes? Let's just take this session to just breathe, have some conversations. Let's do context setting. Let's just say, what are all the factors? And even from a team of like 5 to 10 executives, getting them to popcorn style, what are you seeing? What do you think is happening? What's the context? And even doing that on a big, whiteboard or flip chart process with sticky notes, that can start helping leaders see the views that the other leaders don't have. Right. And so I think it's a great start and say, okay, now this was just with like 10 of you. Imagine how much more context we would get if we brought in the next level of leaders down and got them to sort of situate which of these would be built on and what new ones might be there too. So then it starts expanding their sense of what's going on. And the only thing would be is to keep them from getting overwhelmed, right? Is this constant sort of balance between what they can work with, given all the things they're juggling, and what their capacity is. Stretch but don't tear, stretch but don't tear, that kind of idea. So I think it's a really good practice because it helps them. It also gives them a moment to breathe and see what's upstream, not just what's right in front of them that they're having to deal with. So with that, thank you. Please come off mute and say goodbye. Thank you for joining us.
bye, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Have a lovely day.
Everyone, thank you.